Welcome, everybody. This is Dwayne Anderson here with VMTraining, and we are due to get started here with regards to our technical training series. I have been excited about this for quite some time. Looking forward to hearing a little bit more about the comparison between vSphere and Hyper-V and what really helps each of these products stand apart. We're doing this technical training series in coordination with Advanced Enterprise Solutions. And with that, we have available to us Sean MacArthur, who has been well known in the industry for quite some time, and he's going to be presenting for us today. Before I get to Sean, I want to just share a little bit about why we're doing this and where we're headed and what we're actually doing. The plan here with regards to the Hypervisor Showdown, as we're calling it here, is actually to set up a three-part series. This is the first of many parts. Initial item here is just to help you guys understand a little bit more about vSphere and where it differs from Hyper-V. We're not going to, as a company, we're not here to say one's better than the other. However, I do believe that the author of each of the individual presentations will definitely have their thought process around that specific product, which is good for you guys. So we're going to get started here with is vSphere the best hypervisor out there? And then our next series will be done by Mitch Garvis, who is an expert with Hyper-V, actually so much so that he's been considered a Hyper-V evangelist by Microsoft themselves. And then we're going to finish this whole series up with a debate between these two gurus in the industry. And the debate's not intended to have a battle like two presidents here, but it is intended to help us really get a feel for where those differences lie. So our intention here today is for you guys to learn a little bit more about vSphere and understand why companies are making choices to move to vSphere, even though many people believe or say that Hyper-V is much less expensive. So we'll take a look at all of that. And in the end of the overall series, we just want you guys to be able to answer that question: which hypervisor is best suited for my company? And you'll see that there are significant differences between those, and by understanding those differences and where the companies are headed in the future, will help you know where you need to fit in and what product is going to be best suited for your particular needs. But don't fret. For those of you that are techies, there's plenty of technical information here that's going to be well suited that I think you guys will really enjoy. Now, to explain a little bit about Sean MacArthur, he has been well known in the industry, and I've worked with Sean for a little over 5 years now and have always enjoyed working with him. He has a knack for explaining things that in a way that even I can comprehend, and so that should be really good for you guys. I call him a virtualization extraordinaire. He might say that's a little bit over the top, but that's okay. Sean has done a lot of consulting with large, small, medium-sized companies, so he'll be able to share a little bit about that as he kind of goes through and discusses these things. Got a well-thought-out background here, and he's going to not only have the knowledge necessary for VMware, but he also understands those operating systems that we set up and install within the virtualization operating system. So he'll be explaining a little bit about the different operating systems that are utilized, how that all fits together, why some have better options than others when it comes to their installation and work within the VMware architecture or the vSphere architecture. Now, as we get moving forward here, I do expect questions. And as you come up with questions or want to know a little bit more, please put them in the chat room. And I will attempt to answer them as I go along, or if I believe that it's something that Sean needs to answer because I may not be capable of doing so, or I think it's going to be really pertinent, then I might mention that to Sean. So feel free to ask any and all questions as you guys, as we go along here, and put that in the chat engine, and I will take care of answering them as time allows. So Sean, without further ado, please take over.
Okay, so I'm going to start off today, and hopefully I won't ramble too long, but first thing I'm going to do is dive right into the virtual environment. And what I've got set up is I have a data center set up in Charlotte, North Carolina with about 130 physical boxes, all of them running various different things. They're all virtualized. So I have 130, I have about 110 VMware ESX hosts. I think we have about 10 or 15 Hyper-V hosts at the moment. We've got some Citrix boxes out there, some Zen server boxes, and then we have some actual physical Windows boxes. So a little bit about background about me. I am a Microsoft person. I've been doing Microsoft now since about 1996. So a lot of people look at me and say, well, you know, you're just biased because you don't like Microsoft. And you know, that's really not the case. I've taken and passed 93 Microsoft exams. I've written over 10 and over 15 Microsoft exams for Microsoft themselves, been out in Redmond and done that. And I've developed 5 different Microsoft courses. I spoke at Tech Ed on Exchange 2007. So I don't hate Microsoft at all. I just feel that VMware's got a pretty darn good virtualization product out there. So we're going to take a look at them. I'm connected to a terminal server over here, and you guys should be able to see a terminal server that I'm connected to. And from this terminal server, I've got connections into 2 servers, ESX 109, and then another server, 110. And 110 is currently running Hyper-V, and 109 is running VMware. They're identical hosts, not real excellent hosts by any means. They have their Dell 1950s with a single quad-core processor, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 15,000 RPM SAS drive. So nothing that's real out of the ordinary amazing. But anyway, I've set up a few VMs here. I'm utilizing dynamic memory sharing on both Windows and Linux VM, which is a new technique from Hyper-V to allow you to get more VMs on a single host. So if you look over here, I've got my memory set up to start up at 512 megs on this virtual machine over here. These are all running Windows 2003. And my dynamic memory is then set to a minimum of 8 megs of RAM, dynamically spiking up to 2 gigs of RAM if needed. Now, I'm not going to put these under load just due to time constraints and things like that, but we're going to go ahead and get these things started. So I don't have any running. So I'm going to go ahead and start up 10 Windows virtual machines over here, and then I'll start a couple. I've got some CentOS, if anybody's running Linux out there. I have quite a few customers that run Linux. And we'll start up a couple Ubuntu's and get that going. And then we'll kind of give this a little bit of time. Oh, my goodness. Not enough memory to actually start these. So let's see how much we're actually using here. So you'll see I'm using, I have, like I said, about 16 gigs on here. We're using 13. The initial startup shock didn't allow me to get the second one started. I should be able to get it started now. Might take a few minutes to get that one started. But anyway, while that's going, let's go ahead and start up our VMware host. So you see I was able to start up 10 VMs over here and the 3 Linux VMs. So I got a total of 13 VMs going. Here I have my ESX host over here. And we'll go ahead and go over to virtual machines and templates. And I've got a couple things over here. So we'll go into production. You'll see I have the same thing over here. I've got 10 virtual machines running Windows, and a couple CentOS and a couple Ubuntu. And you'll see I'll be able to start these up right here. No big deal. And they're all powering on. Now let's go back over to that Windows box and see if I can get that other CentOS or Ubuntu up and started. See if the memory's freed up yet. Now it looks like I was able to get that. Let's see if I can get another CentOS going here. I couldn't do that. Still not enough memory. Let's go back to VMware, see what's going on. Okay, these are all powered up. But guess what? When you look at running a data center, everybody looks at the cost of the hypervisor. There's cost of the physical hardware. There's cost of the SAN. There's cost of the heating and cooling. And I can tell you, I just last month had a $3,700 overage on my electricity bill. So there's a lot of things you got to be aware of when you run virtualization. And you can see over here, I'm running the exact same amount of VMs on Hyper-V as I am on VMware. But look at what I can do over here on VMware. I have a few more VMs. Let me go ahead and start up. Over here in this little bonus, I have an extra 40 VMs. I can go ahead and start these all up at the same time on VMware. No big deal. Can do that on Hyper-V. So I can run on a single quad-core host. I can start up, I believe I have 52 or 53 virtual machines running on VMware on a quad-core host with 16 gigs of RAM. And you'll see that all of these VMs over here are configured with 2 gigs of memory on the memory size over here. So they're configured exactly the same way that they are over on VMware as they are on Hyper-V. I wanted to make sure that the test was accurate. I didn't want to skew it in any way, Microsoft, VMware, whatever. And you can see these things are starting right up, and they're all started over here. Now, it's going to take some time to get these things started and up and running. I'm not going to instantaneously be able to start these. If you open up a console, you'll see that they're in the boot up process right now. And as I mentioned before, there's a single SAS disk. So, wow, you can see this guy's already booted up. That's pretty quick. I didn't expect that, in all honesty. But there's a single SAS disk supporting 52 virtual machines. I'm not running on my SAN. I do have 10 gig connections to an SSD SAN. I'm not using that. I'm doing everything on this local single hard drive. So you can see these guys here are still booting up. If we look at the Hyper-V box, you'll see that we are in probably some different stages. I don't know where they're at over here. We'll take a look. So we got this guy over here. Got this little warning because I just powered them off. Didn't really care about shutting them down or anything. So they're up and running over here. See where the Ubuntus are at. So it's at the login prompt right there, so we're good to go. All right, awesome. So let's kind of get into the presentation now, and I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between the virtual environment and the lecture environment. I don't want to bore you guys with the lecture a whole heck of a lot. I'd rather personally get in and see what's going on and actually look at this stuff in action, because that's where you can truly see the power of the two hypervisors. So over here, when you look at the differentiation, VMware over the years first came out with a product called ESX. And actually before that, they had Workstation, and I've been working with Workstation since I don't even remember, 2001, 2003, something like that. I initially got into ESX around the 2.5 days, and really I became a VMware trainer, I believe it was in 2006 with ESX 301. With the advent of 3.5, they came out with a new product called ESXi, which was a slimmed-down hypervisor. They used to have, ESX used to have what was called a service console, which was running in there. They got rid of that. Now they just have this ESXi based upon your x86 architecture. And we're running this on some old junky Dell 1950s. There's definitely nothing special about it. I do have some bigger hosts that I can show you here. I have one host that has 80 cores and 500 gigs of RAM and 10 gig E, and it's a pretty decent sized host. Over here, you'll see the Microsoft box looks very similar to this, but what they have is a parent partition, because what you're doing is you're installing Windows on top of your box, and with Windows, you have the vulnerabilities that can happen with Windows. Now, there's two ways you can get Hyper-V. You can install a regular Windows operating system like Windows 2012, or what's pretty neat is it's actually included with Windows 8 nowadays, and then you install a role on top of that operating system for Hyper-V, and then you can use that. The other thing you can do is you can actually install Microsoft Hyper-V Server, which is the dedicated box just for Hyper-V. So it's a little bit smaller. It's got a slimmed-down security profile, so it protects you a little bit better, little less prone to hacking. So that's kind of nice. But that's what you have there. Now, here they talk about patching. And if you guys are familiar with Microsoft, Microsoft comes out with patches, and they have what's called Patch Tuesday. And one of the things that I found was pretty interesting about this slide here is they talk about every Patch Tuesday since the release of Hyper-V, which Hyper-V version 3, which is what we're talking about, which is what's included with 2012, that came out September 4th. And every single Patch Tuesday has had an important or a critical security update to the server that was unrelated to virtualization, but it required a reboot of the host. So when you look at that over here, over the course of the different months and the different things that have come out, every single one of these has had that. And here they're just going to some of the patches. Doesn't really. Now over here, I thought was an interesting slide because here was a company that was virtualized, and they had a mix of Hyper-V and VMware. And I can't personally say I was involved with this particular company here, but they had 450 virtual machines. They had 100,000 plus employees. They're about 50% vSphere and 50% Hyper-V. And during a patch update, one of their Hyper-V cluster failed due to, I don't know, some sort of patch. And they lost 300 VMs, and they were unable to recover 70% of them. So now this particular company is going strictly to 100% vSphere environment. And I'm not saying that that is definitely going to happen to you. I found Hyper-V to be a very stable platform, so I don't really know what happened in this particular case here. But obviously it was a problem for this company. Here is, Dwayne and I were looking at this slide, and we were kind of laughing about this. Here we see a VMware Hypervisor, and we can see that these host uptimes here on this one particular host here was 2,326 days. And the reason that Dwayne and I were laughing is because typically when you do patch a VMware host, you have to reboot it. And also VMware comes out with updates every 6 months to 1 year. So to say that this one host had uptime of 6 years, that's awesome. That means that in 6 years they never patched this host. They never upgraded it to the next operating system. And Dwayne and I were kind of working some numbers. If you work backwards 6 years from today, they would have to be running like ESX 301 or 302. So it's a good testament to say that you could run this long, and that's great. But I would never suggest that for one of my customers. Patch those hosts. Don't let them run that long. And you can see all the days over there. I guess if you have an environment that doesn't touch the internet, you don't have to worry about the things like that. You might be okay, but I definitely would not suggest running that sort of time. But kind of interesting. I don't think any of us would ever go 6 years without patching our Windows hosts. And remember, typically in your VMware environment, you're running Windows virtual machines. So you'll still have to patch those virtual machines through some sort of mechanism and reboot those virtual machines as needed. Now, here we're going to do a little demo of how you would actually use a product from VMware, which is free on almost every version to patch hosts, the whole vSphere environment. It's very simple to use. But if we run over here, I have, this environment here still up and booting up and all that stuff, but I have our bigger environment here where what I've got in this guy is I have 4 hosts, and you can see over here this one host has 80 logical processors. We're running over here 67 virtual machines, so a fairly small amount of virtual machines for a VMware host. You can see it's using about 10,000 megahertz of CPU and about 168 gigs of RAM. Our other hosts here are a little bit smaller. They're just dual hex cores, so we got 24 processors. But this guy, with 24 logical processors, is running 103 virtual machines. And out of the 103 virtual machines, we're only using 3,200 megahertz. And these are production virtual machines. This is running SQL servers and Exchange servers. In the little lab environment I have set up with Hyper-V, those guys are doing nothing. Over here, these are Exchange servers. I'm running an Exchange cluster that I could do a failover from one node to another. We've got SQL 2005, SQL 2008, SQL 2012 machines up and running. And you can see we're using 78 gigs of RAM here. And all total in this cluster, on 4 hosts, we're running 404 virtual machines. So, it's fairly stout. It averages about 100 virtual machines per host. And again, looking at this one here, we're way underutilized on the resources. I could probably double the capacity of my cluster easily without spending a single dime. So I could probably have 800 virtual machines running on 4 hosts. But over in Hyper-V, I have 14. Let's see if I can get another one started right now, since it's kind of had time to settle. Looks like I got that one. Let's see if we can get another one over here. Oh, can't do that. So I'm able to bring on one extra VM every so often, which is nice, I guess. But to do Update Manager, what I can do is I can look at my cluster here, and Update Manager is a product from VMware that allows you to patch your host. So I can go over here, and they have a little tab built right in, integrated right into the Virtual Center. And what I'm using is what's called the vSphere client, which is just a GUI way to manage it. And you can see I got a couple different things over here. I got some critical host patches. I got some I have an update over here, some non-critical host patches. I got some Broadcom drivers. You'll see I'm also able to patch things like Dell EqualLogic, because we have a couple EqualLogics attached to this cluster as well as some other SANs. So I can go in there and say, you know, I've got 4 hosts down here. How are my hosts in comparison to all these updates that come down from VMware? We can go ahead and scan those. I can't upgrade them because I'm running the newest version of vSphere, which is 5.1. But it'll go through here, and it'll do a scan, and you'll see when you look at upgrades, it's compliant. Extensions, it's compliant. It's going to give me the patch status here, which honestly I don't know. Oh, not compliant. So I'm probably missing a few patches over here. And I could click over here, and I could do what they call remediate. And what that would do is that would actually patch that host. Now, as I mentioned, typically when you patch a host, you have to reboot it. I don't know the extent of what patches are missing. It looks like it's missing 4. I don't have to go in here and look. But either way, I could do this during the day. And what it would do is through technologies like what they call DRS through VMware, it would put this host right here into maintenance mode, move all of the VMs while they're running from one host to another host, put one into maintenance mode, apply the patches to number 1, reboot it if it needs to be rebooted, take it out of maintenance mode, and then move on to the next host. And there's absolutely no downtime for the virtual machines, and the whole thing is automated. So, you know, I still do Exchange migrations and things like that. So, like 2 weeks ago, I was at a data center from 9 p.m. until 6 o'clock in the morning doing a reconfiguration of some Cisco switches and some NetApp storage. And so I still have to do that, but it's great to see from a VMware perspective that I'm able to get a ton of stuff done during the day now. I'm not having to spend all of my nights in the data center because of products like Update Manager, which is really, really cool. So pretty neat product. And we'll come back and look at that.
Say, Sean?
Yes.
Sean, we had a good question here from Michael that I thought might be pertinent here. He asked if we're running in this running on production boxes, what kind of load are we seeing in this in a standard production environment? So I think what Michael's asking here is what kind of average load would you expect to see when you're out working with consulting? Because obviously we have way more resources than what's necessary for our particular environment.
Well, I see all kinds of different things, and to be honest with you, typically customers overbuy. I had a customer in California about a month ago, and he told me, you know, Sean, I can't get any of my VMs to vMotion. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, we had a firm come in, they installed 3 ESXi hosts, and they put in a SAN. Can't remember what type it was, just some iSCSI SAN. And I said, so it won't vMotion. I said, you got all your VM kernel ports set up? And he's like, oh, I don't really know. So we pulled it up and we looked at it, and he had 5 virtual machines running on 3 hosts. And I was like, dude, how many users do you have in your whole company? He said, about 35. I said, so why is your domain controller set to use 4 virtual CPUs and 32 gigs of RAM? He's like, I don't know. That's what they set it up for. And I showed him one of our domain controllers over here that we have. So here's a domain controller we have right here. And this guy is Windows 2008 R2 with Windows 2008 R2 domain. We've got it configured for 512 megabytes of RAM. And this guy is currently servicing about 250 to 300 users on a consistent basis. And you can see that this guy is currently using 18% of the 500 megs. So that's what, about 100 megs? You know, so what we did was we lowered the RAM and the CPU usage down this guy's, and I left him at a gig, which is way more than what he needed. And then we moved all the other ones down. Not only were we able to vMotion all of his VMs once we got those down to a manageable level, but we were able to take all 5 of those VMs, consolidate them onto a single host so that we could do patching, and his single host was running under 25% utilization. So what kind of utilization do you want to see? You want to see enough utilization where you could clear off a host. So if I have a 3-node cluster, I'd want to be no more than 66% utilization. That way I could shut down one host, whether it's due to power failure or maintenance or whatever, and be able to move VMs around. Not always the case.
One of the other things that Michael is asking here is, when he was talking about, like, with the SQL Server and things of that nature that we were talking about, and the fact that we're not under a whole lot of load. The numbers are pretty low. So what happens if we have a SQL Server that is under load, and how does that affect performance, and what might you have with regards to with regards to expectations associated with that?
Well, I don't want to undersize virtual machines. I don't care if you run a Hyper-V or VMware. That doesn't matter to me. I want to do what I call right-size virtual machines. I don't want to give them too much. I don't want to give them too little. But you have to understand how applications like Exchange and SQL work. I don't care how much RAM you give a virtual machine. Exchange is going to use it all. That's just how the store.exe process works. If you give it 2 or 4 or 64, it is going to use it all. It just slams right up there. That's how it works. Awesome. That was designed. Same thing with SQL. You have to actually go in and make a registry entry to limit the size of how much it's going to use if you want to do that. But you can see here we have a production SQL box right here, which is for a product called Microsoft Dynamics. And this is using SQL 2008. And right now, this guy is we've got it configured for 64 gigs of RAM right here, and it's using about 25% of that, or 27% of that, so let's just say 1/3. So it's using about 20 gigs of that right now inside the guest. So I will give a VM whatever it needs to operate. The cool thing about VMware is that while this box is running, and we'll look at this later on, I can actually increase the size of the memory on the fly. I don't have to shut that VM down. I can say, whoa, holy crap, this guy is just maxing out. So let's go in here and right on the fly, let's bump this guy up to 128 gigs. I'm not going to do that. I'm just saying that you could right there on the fly. So that's one of the really cool features. And not only could I do the memory on that guy, but I could also do the CPU. I could add additional hard drives. I can expand the hard drives. And I'll show you how to do that later on. So lots of expandability right on the fly. I typically tell my customers, if you don't know what to do, start off with one virtual CPU and start off with 1 gig of memory and move up from there, because it's so easy to add stuff. To take it away, I've got to power the VM off, because Microsoft operating systems have a problem when it's got an application that's using the memory space and you rip memory away from it. It doesn't seem to like that for whatever reason. So, to move it down, you got to power it off. Which the great thing about VMware is that if you power it off, you can typically, and same thing with Hyper-V, with the virtual environment in general, you can power it back on in 15 to 30 seconds. You can typically get a machine up and running. It doesn't have to go do a memory check and BIOS and blah, blah, blah. So it gives you a lot of new options. A lot of times what I tell my customers is, with VMware, you have to kind of free your mind to think about what are some of the things we can do in a VMware or a virtual environment that we can't do on physical. And it's just truly amazing, some of the things you can do. And trust me, I could talk about this stuff for hours. But let's go back here and see what we got. So got everything kind of started there. We looked at the Update Manager a little bit. Now, here's just some of the features built into VMware, which makes it awesome. vMotion. Here I'm using this terminal server. If you look at my screen, I'm using a terminal server over here called TS4. And if I get out of this terminal server here, let's say I open up a command prompt over here. I'm on my actual desktop. I'm not on the... So if I ping ts4.vmtraining.net -t, which is just a continuous ping out here. So I'm pinging over the internet to a public IP address. I can go over here and, if I can find TS4. All right, so let's see where this guy's running at. This guy's currently running on 1.0. So I want to move this guy over to, let's say, 5.0. Doesn't really matter. I can go over here and click Migrate, and we'll just change the host. So right during the day, while I'm doing this presentation with, 100 plus people on the line, I'm going to move my terminal server over here. Man, that's kind of what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if it breaks? My whole presentation is messed up. So a lot of things to be worried about here. So you'll see it's migrating it. And you'll see, I'm seeing this. There's no glitches going on. There's no screen flickers. Everything is just working exactly the way I want it to work. And in 10 seconds or 15, whatever it took, it moved it. You look over here, I lost a single ping packet from point A to point B. And I'm not on the local network. This is over the internet where my typical latency is 45, 46 seconds. When you're on a local network, your typical latency will be anywhere from 1 to 10 milliseconds right here. So you're talking about it just went a little bit over the threshold to give you a timeout. But a single ping packet loss, when you look at that in the terms of TCP/IP, TCP being a connection-oriented protocol, losing a ping packet's no big deal. If it did lose one packet, it's just going to retransmit that, and not a big deal. Not a single glitch. Worked right there on the fly, and now I just moved things around. So very cool the way that you can go in and just move stuff around. So that's vMotion. It has some other technologies, HA and fault tolerance, which if you want to know more about those, we can get into those later. It's got a thing with storage vMotion, which is pretty cool. That actually came out in ESX 3.5. It's been enhanced with 3.5. The only way you could use it via command line, which I always like command line. It makes me feel cool. But I can go through there and I can actually reallocate my storage. So if I'm running on a SAN LUN that's getting over provisioned and I'm running out of space, I can move it to a different LUN on the fly during the day. And it's also got some capabilities with vMotion, where vMotion, it can go in and analyze your cluster, and it can automatically move things around for you, which is pretty neat. Because if you look over here on my cluster, you can see that I've had 6,716 total migrations using vMotion. This is where DRS is kicked in and just moves stuff around as it sees fit to reallocate among my servers. And storage vMotion, they now have what's called storage DRS, where it can analyze my storage, and based upon two factors, either capacity because I'm running out, if I'm using what they call thin provision virtual disks, or due to IOPS, it can move it around to a different data store to be able to provide it the IOPS. So if you don't have a SAN that supports things like auto tiering, you have storage DRS will actually go in and reallocate your storage to faster or more available storage as needed, which is pretty cool. Anyway, here's some other features. And if you really want, one of the neat features that VMware has, they have a product offering called Site Recovery Manager, where you can have a production facility in, let's say, Charlotte, where our data center's at, and you maybe want to have a DR site in, let's say, Denver, Colorado. You can actually have replication set up through either your SAN replication, or you can use replication built into vCenter, which is free, called vSphere replication, and you can replicate the data from your production data center to your recovery data center, and you can automate the process of failing over to the Denver data center and bringing all the VMs up. And the VMs could actually be renamed, they could be re-IP'd to the new IP address over there, and all kinds of stuff that you can do automated through this product. And that is an additional add-on product. But I've implemented that for about 20 customers, and it's been great. Here they talk about some of the business continuity solutions. One of the things that VMware really touts is what they call running business-critical applications. BCAs is what they call them. And they're talking about not running your file and print servers and the easy things, but actually taking your business-critical database servers, whether it's SQL or Oracle or Exchange, or even network-critical systems like voice-over IP systems, and being able to virtualize them. With VMware's distributed switch, we actually have the capability to extend our physical network components into the virtual network, and now we have things where we can do network vMotion. So if you're on a telephone call with someone through a VoIP provider that's running on a VM, I can now vMotion it just like I did my terminal server over here, and it will move the CPU and the memory from one host to the other, but it will also move the networking connections from one host to the other. So I'm not going to drop that telephone call during a vMotion, which could happen during the middle of the day. So now we can put our business critical applications in VMware and not worry about it. When you look at HA, it does have support for Microsoft clusters. So if you want to run a virtual machine on top of VMware and you want to cluster it using Microsoft cluster services, you can. So if you want to run a SQL cluster, and people always ask me, well, if I'm using VMware, why the heck would I need to use a SQL cluster or anything like that? And the reason for that is I may have the best VMware Hyper-V solution in the world, but if my virtual machine blue screens due to a patch or whatever, what am I going to do? I mean, yeah, I can restore from a snapshot or a backup or something like that, undo changes, but still, I've got downtime. So there's still opportunities to run Microsoft clusters, and with 5.1, you could actually run up to 5-node clusters in there. So let's just say you're running a 2-node SQL cluster, you can patch your passive node. You could even, it's not supported, but you can even snapshot that passive node, patch it, test it, make sure everything's good, fail over your database to that passive node, and then go over and now do your new passive node and patch that so you won't have any downtime. And you do that while it's on top of VMware, which is pretty cool. They have a product called Fault Tolerance, which there's a great video on YouTube by Jason Nash from Vero that talks about fault tolerance, about 8 minutes long. And what this allows you to do is protect a virtual machine where it's as simple as right-click in the VM, go to fault tolerance and enable it. And what it does, it creates an exact duplicate copy of that virtual machine on another host, and it keeps it fully up to date. So where I could be watching a video on VM number 1, it's logging the changes and shipping them to VM number 2, and then if VM number 1 dies, VM number 2 is instantly automatically up. No downtime. There are some limitations with that, but it's a pretty good product, and it's free. And here's the ability to hot add CPU. I have the ability to hot add CPU, memory, and disk right to VM while they're running, which is what I was going to show you guys here. So if we jump back over to my vSphere host over here with this, you'll see I got a couple Windows 2008 virtual machines over here. Okay, so let's look at a couple things here. You can see when we look at this guy that we got about 20 gig on my C drive, got about 5 gigs free. Over here, we're using about, I believe it's 1 CPU. So we got 1 CPU, and we got 2 gigs of RAM. Okay, not enough for what we're doing. I need more for whatever reason. No big deal. While it's running, we go through here, edit settings, and say, let's increase some stuff. So let's go in and let's increase the memory to, I don't know, 4 gigs. Bump my CPUs. Let's bump them up to 2 CPUs on the fly. And my hard disk is running out of space, so let's pop this guy up to 25 gigs of RAM right here. No big deal. Give it a few seconds. You'll see down in the bottom here it's in progress, so it hasn't done it yet. I've never done this with Task Manager open, so we'll see what it says. Okay, restart it. It tells you number of installed processors changed. Pretty cool. Good to know. So there you go. Now you can see I've got 2 CPUs right there on the fly. I've got 4 gigs of RAM right there. You'll see my hard drive is still 20 gigs. However, if I go into my storage, disk management right here, you'll see I show a 20 gig drive right here. That's just because it hasn't gone out and discovered any changes yet. So we do a little disk rescan, and you'll see I got the free space over here, 5 extra gigs, and we can just, no big deal, extend the volume right on the fly. And now we got 25 gigs. And if we go look in here, we may have to refresh this guy. Let's just click out and come back. And now you'll see I got 25 gigs available. No big deal. And that's, when you look at owning a system, and I don't care what it is, but you have the initial cost of purchase of buying something, and then you have the maintenance cost to maintain something. And you see how easy it is to do some of the maintenance on these systems, like what I'm talking about here.
Say, Sean, there was a good question along the lines of the hot add there.
Yeah.
The question was, how do you add another CPU to a single CPU HAL, the hardware architecture layer?
Yeah, now that's a problem back with older operating systems, especially if you went back as old as like NT4 and I think 2000 as well. But with the newer operating systems like Windows 2008, you don't have to switch the HAL, so you're okay with that. But older ones, that was definitely a problem. And realistically, the only way to change the HAL is to do a reinstall on those things. So, yeah, that's why what they suggested that you should do back in the old days was install it with the multiprocessor HAL, and then if you had to cut it back to one VM or one virtual CPU, you'd be fine because then you could always move forward. So the multiprocessor HAL would work on a single CPU VM or host, but the single processor HAL would not work with multiple CPUs. So that's where you had the problem back in the old days. We don't really run into that anymore with newer OSs. And that's the same for both Linux and Microsoft OSs. The newer ones all support that. Yes, the hot added CPU, 2008 data center and R2 data center in 2012. Here's another interesting thing is I have a lot of customers with large data centers that are running not just Windows OSs. You know, on some of my smaller customers, they're running, you know, all 2003 or all 2008. You know, so Hyper-V does good for that. However, when you look at the supported operating systems, there's just a ton more OSs supported in VMware, and which is really, really cool. You also have the ability to go to the appliance marketplace from VMware and just download pre-built virtual machines. So if you want to test out RHEL 6 or RHEL 3 or SLES or FreeBSD or whatever, you just download a pre-built VM, load it up there. They'll usually tell you the username and password. I would never use that for production, but it's a great way to test something out, which is pretty cool. So a lot more supported operating systems. Now here's a lot of workaround problems. And a lot of this is if you understand how the memory management works with Hyper-V. Hyper-V dynamic memory works pretty good. It has a startup memory value, and then after you start it up, it has dynamic memory, so where you can use a minimum amount of memory and a maximum amount of memory, which works pretty good. Problem is, it doesn't work for Linux. It only works for Microsoft virtual machines. So you can see, and this isn't just me talking, the numbers don't lie. So when you come over here, you can see when we look at my Hyper-V box, you can see my Ubuntu's. They're using 2 gigs of memory. You can see over here on my Windows 2001, or Windows 2K1, which is 2008 or 2003, it's using 195, 194, 194, 194. So they're kind of going wherever they need, but these over here, they're using 2 gigs, even though you can see I've got them set up for dynamic memory. I've got them set up here. Startup RAM 2048, dynamic memory is enabled, minimum 16, maximum 2048. And it's still just using the 2048 on that.
Sean, I've had quite a few questions around how much RAM is actually in use on the Hyper-V box compared to the VMware box if they're both running 16 gigs. You know, even though there's different numbers there, what's the total amount of RAM that's currently in use on those systems?
Well, that's a good question. We'll get into that later on. We're actually going to do some pretty extravagant monitoring to be able to see what we're using on Hyper-V versus what we're using on VMware and how it's actually allocated. So if I can put that off for a little bit of time, I'll do a good demonstration on that. So back to this here, one of the things they're saying is, okay, so Windows Wave VMs work great on Hyper-V. And you can run some versions of Linux, but you have some limitations there with memory optimization, things like that. So you know what we can do? Let's go ahead and let's run KVM, which is a product that runs on top of Linux, whether it's Red Hat or whatever, but that's a free thing that's included with that. And then we can put our Linux VMs over there. Okay, great. But then we want to run some Oracle stuff, so we'll go ahead and run Oracle VM for our Hypervisor there. And, we want to run XenApp, which we could do that on top of Hyper-V, but we're going to put that on top of Citrix Xen server there. So now I'm running 4 different hypervisors with 4 different ways to manage them and 4 different ways to patch them to get the ultimate, consolidation for all of my VMs and maximizing my memory and storage. Or I can run vSphere and run all of them on top of VMware and get the maximum advantage from everything, which is really pretty cool. And we'll look at the memory optimization techniques they use. And here's just a few things on Linux support. What's supported with vSphere and what's supported with Hyper-V. Things like dynamic memory doesn't work on Linux. Data protection, which is for backing up Windows and Linux, works great on both Windows and Linux. Over here, it doesn't work with Linux. So if you have some Linux, you definitely have some issues over in Hyper-V. So over here, we've looked at some things, and here we're actually going to look at the analysis of memory usage and things like that. And let's go see what we have at the differences. So let's start off here looking at Hyper-V and see what we got going on. So the question was, how much memory are we using? The answer, I don't know. Let's go look. So we have a couple different tools. Obviously, the Easy Task Manager, which gives you not a whole heck of a lot. But you can see over here I'm using 14.6 gigs of my 16 gigs of RAM that's available on this host. Not using a whole heck of a lot of CPU. But you know what I want to know? Which of my VMs is actually using which allocation of that 14.6? So I don't see that in here. So let's go ahead and open up Resource Monitor, and we'll take a look at that. And you'll see here's all my processes that are running for memory. And let's sort it here, see if we can see anything. Actually, let me just expand this. I can't. For a reason, it's not letting me. But I can sort through, and it does not show you on a per VM basis. I have no clue how much each VM is using. Now, I can buy additional products like System Center Virtual Machine Manager or System Center Operations Manager, which would really be better for that. And then I can actually go in and get some information from that. So I don't have that natively available through the tools. So let's see what we have in VMware. I'm just going to close this VM down. And I'm using Virtual Center here, so that's not a fair comparison. Let's go to VMware's free product, which is ESX. If you don't know, VMware ESXi is free. It only costs money if you join it to Virtual Center. So what do we have with this standalone free product? I mean, what kind of limited stuff do we have since we're not managing it by Virtual Center? So they have what they call a Performance tab. And you can see over here, I can look at real-time counters. Like I can look at real-time CPU. Whoops. Missed it. So I can see where I'm at real time with CPU. Now, if you look at this over here, you can see I was at nothing, and then about 2:10 I powered all my VMs, so I had a little spike, which spikes don't bother me. I mean, that's a temporary thing. Here's where we're really looking at our steady average here, which is about 2,500 megahertz of CPU. And the nice little graph you can go to is just right on the host. You can see over here, I'm using 1,184 megahertz of CPU total for 52 VMs. I'm using about 11.5 gigs of memory for 52 virtual machines. I don't care who you are. That's impressive. You look over here and you can see the amount of usage on my cores for CPU. And we can search for other counters over here in real time like memory. And we can see, okay, memory, granted, consumed, active, ballooned, what's going on over here. And we can see the different things. And I'm not going to get into specifically what those are, but what I can do is I can go to chart options here under memory, and I can choose the different things I want to do. I can do what's called a stat graph per VM, and I want to look at active memory. I want to see what's actively being used on these guys right here. Okay, so going over here, I can now see CentOS 3, for example, is currently using 22 megabytes, because you'll see this is in kilobytes, so it's using about 22 megs of active memory. Now, the most it's ever used was, it looks like, about 880 megs, if I'm reading that right, which is about right because it has 2 gigs of RAM. So over here, this guy's used about 1.5 gigs, CentOS 1, and you can go through and look at the list. And the cool thing is I can see per VM, here's my Windows 2008 VM. I can see how it highlights it here in the chart. I can see where it had the spike on startup and how it's come down, and it's pretty steady right now, and I can see exactly what the latest memory usage. And you can see that my W282, which is a 2008 box, is using about, 293 megs of memory, and my W2K1 is using about 20. So you have some advanced performance options here. Another chart that really I like is you can go in here to your resource allocation. You're not going to get it here. Actually, here's the one I'm looking at, my virtual machines right here. And you can see from this chart how much memory they're configured for, and I can rearrange these things. So I can see that each one of these is configured for 2 gigs of RAM. Sort this up here. All right, so let's do it this way. Sort it up this way over here, and I can see that, for example, my Windows 2K1 right here is provisioned for 5 gigs of space. I'm using about 4 gigs of space. It's using 28 megahertz of CPU. It's about 75%, just because I have it open. I was looking at it. So if you look at this other one right below it, it's using 1% of the 2 gigs. It's using about 191 megabytes of host memory to maintain this guy. Now, I do get some information from Hyper-V if I actually go to Hyper-V Manager over here, and I can see how much memory they're using here. Just the assigned memory is what I have, but I don't see much more than that. Even if I go over here to memory, I see a little bit of stuff down here in the bottom, but not much more than how it's configured. So real limited on what I can see from there. But this is great for the novices. We're experts, so we're going to go in and do some command line. We're going to use some PuTTY. And they got some cool tools over here with ESX Top. I don't know if you guys have ever used that. And this shows me some cool information, CPU by default. If I want to look at memory, I can go in here and look at the memory. And this shows me some really cool information here. I can see the physical memory on my host right here is 16 gigs. My VM kernel has got about 16 gigs assigned to it. This number right here is really cool. This shows me that 82 gigs of memory. Wait a minute. My host only has 16 gigs of physical. 82 gigs of memory is shared. And VMware has what's called transparent page sharing, meaning if I have 2 virtual machines that are running Windows, they're almost exactly the same. And let's say they're both running processes like CSRSS and LSASS and different things like that. Why do I need to run that process 2 separate times? Let's just run it once. Now, it doesn't do it on a process level. It does it on a bit level, at the memory level. So it's constantly looking in here. And what happens is it shares that memory as read-only, so all the VMs can have access to it. And then whenever VM wants to make a change and make it unique, it does what's called copy on write, and it's able to do that. But I can go down here and look and get some very detailed information, you know, swap that's being used and just the different things. Compressed memory, you know, swap memory is not available in Hyper-V. The transparent page sharing, not available in Hyper-V. The compressed memory, not available in Hyper-V. Again, not saying Hyper-V is good or bad. It just isn't there. You know, so people argue one way or the other. The fact of the matter is, I'm running 52 VMs on this host. I'm running 14 on the other one. But who knows? If I go over there now, I might be able to start up number 15. You know, but I started these right up, and they're all running great. And here's a little chart. And I'm not going to go through every number on here. I'm not a sales guy. But the thing that VMware talks about, they have these 2 words, CapEx and OpEx. CapEx means how much money are you spending out of your pocket right now to get up and running. And, you know, people argue VMware's more expensive. Well, if I had 50 VMs to run over here, I could do that on one host. But if I could only put 14 on one Microsoft host, I would need, you know, what, 4? So, yeah, I might save some money not having to buy a VMware license, but now I got to buy 4 servers. I have to have more rack space. I have to have network connectivity between them. So, yeah, you got a little bit more over there. So that's your CapEx. How much do you have to spend to get these up and running? And they got some numbers up here. The other thing is what they have is what's called OpEx. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Exchange, but if you're running Exchange 2007 and you pay for it, and then you decide to go to Exchange 2010, you got to pay for it all over again. With VMware, you buy the hypervisor, you pay for what they call service and support, which means if you have any problems, you call VMware and they're going to help you. That's included for free. Then when they come out with the next version of the operating system, it's free to upgrade. So if you bought your VMware back in 3.01 days, you've been, as long as your support's current, you have been upgrading to 5.1 for free. It doesn't cost you a dime. And that's pretty neat. And they have upgrade programs. You know, you bought a little bit, you bought a lower license model, and now you want to upgrade it to something a little bit better. You bought 2 hosts, now you need 4 hosts. They have the ability to do that. So you have to look at a lot of things when you really want to analyze and compare the cost. You know, and over here they're talking about 120 VMs. And you look at the density that they show on this slide down at the bottom, 24 VMs on a VMware host across 5 hosts compared to 20 VMs per host across 6 hosts. From what I'm saying and what I just showed you, you know, not what I'm saying, but what you just saw, you're actually able to get more density than what they're even showing on the screen. I think they're being nicer than what the truth might actually be. Now over here they got a bunch of stuff, and what this is, it's just comparing a feature that might exist on VMware and what they say does or doesn't have in Microsoft. Of course, they're going to show you all the stuff they do have and make it seem like VMware's winning the battle. And here's this OpEx that I talked about, which is kind of interesting because your OpEx, your operational expenditure, is what's really seen over time. I mean, when you do the initial install, you go to your boss and you say, "Hey, I want to implement VMware so we can save a ton of money." He goes, "That's great. What do we need to do?" And you go, "Well, I need to check for $250,000. He's going, "How is this saving me money? I'm just spending $250,000. I don't get it." But where you save your money is over the long haul. Management, the software, less hosts than you would, and that sort of thing. So you have to really look at the entire picture when you're comparing hypervisors. And here's some more specs, which, a lot of people, Microsoft included, if you look over here, VMware supports 160 CPUs per host, 2 terabytes of RAM, 64 virtual CPUs, and 1 terabyte of virtual memory. Hyper-V supports up to 320 physical CPUs, 4 terabytes of RAM, 64 virtual CPUs, which means you can build a VM with 64 virtual CPUs and 1 terabyte of RAM. So on the VM side, they're the same. But a host with 320 CPUs and 4 terabytes of RAM, I haven't seen one of those. I'm sure they're out there. I do not have one, but that's pretty stout. Do you really want to run all those VMs on there? What if that one guy dies? Over here, they just compare some more features and things like that. So I'm not going to go through all of these. Another thing that's really cool about VMware is the integration of third-party stuff. I have a lot of customers who are using NetApp. That's probably the most common. I'm not going to say it's the most common. That's the most common for my customers. I see a lot of EMC, and then we have like some EqualLogic. There's a lot of cool tools, and I want to show you some of the tools you can do to really maximize your environment. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm just going to spend a few minutes on this. And here's one of the tools I really enjoy here, and it saved me a lot of time, and that's a free tool called RV Tools. I don't know if you've ever used it, but this is a free tool you can use, connect your virtual center, and give you all kinds of information. Like here you can see a server AES DNS, you can see how many CPUs it's got, how much memory, what port group it's connected to, the different things over here. I can look at my virtual CPUs and see, the number of CPUs, cores, max overall, different information about it, my virtual memory, just tons and tons. And in fact, this is way too much for me to look at. So what I can do is I can go in here and export all of this to Excel or to a CSV file. You can see over here on my Exchange server, I'm using, I've mounted some empty disks to a folder, so I've got my databases and my logs for different Exchange servers and things like that. But what really helped me out yesterday at a customer site here in North Carolina is I went to this vHealth tab, and what I found at the customer site was they had almost 1 terabyte of snapshots. And this tells you over here, look, dude, this VM on the C drive is running out. It's got 0% disk space available on the C drive. I need to go fix this. And the cool thing about this, I can fix it on the fly. Here's another one. Ooh, it's down to 5%. Here's some other things that we got going on, for whatever they are. Here you can see I've got some folders that are misnamed. Here, ooh, I got a zombie VM, so we keep these so we can kill them off on the weekends. But we got a bunch of those. Yeah, actually, my customer had a bunch of these, and what we found out was they had moved VMs but left the originals in place, or they deleted a VM from the inventory but left on this thing. So we went in and cleaned up a bunch of stuff over there. Over here, we've got some stuff. These are connected to the CD-ROM. Big deal. Those are easy fixes. VMware tools are out of date. Oh, here we got some snapshots on these guys here. With VMware tools, I'm not too concerned with those being out of date because we're actually, we do a lot of training in this environment. So we have VMs like this right here, which are running ESX as a VM running under the ESX host. So kind of some crazy stuff we have. But it's a proactive tool that's free to help you analyze your environment. So it doesn't cost a dime for this thing. Let's see, what else was I going to show you? Storage integration. Yeah, this is pretty cool. Over here, you can see on our home page here for vSphere, We have integration with vSphere Operations Manager, which is a product from VMware. I'll show you that. And like Dell EqualLogic. So for example, I could go into a VM that's running out of space. You saw how I increased the space of the C drive. It was kind of a two-part process. Increase it here, and then go in the VM and increase it. That's cool. But I can go down here to this EqualLogic tab, and I can go ahead and increase it from here. That way, I don't have to do anything inside the VM, which is pretty neat, and increase the operating system as well. But I can go over here, and there's actually an EqualLogic tab right here. I can click on this, and through one pane of glass, I'm now managing my EqualLogic device. I can go in here and see my data stores that we have created on this guy over here. And I have several different data stores. I can modify a data store right here. Maybe I want to resize it. The guy's running out of space. Let's resize it right there on the fly. I don't have to switch to the EqualLogic tool to do this. It's all right here. I can look at smart copies and replication and scheduled tasks and all kinds of different stuff. If you're running VDI with VMware View, they have a tool in here where you can actually look at that. So, whether you're running NetApp or you're running EMC, they have these built in to the vSphere client, so you don't have to. It's ease of management, which makes it really nice. And the last thing I was going to show you is just Operations Manager, which is a product from VMware, which shows you several different levels, shows you a different way of managing your environment. So it'll actually peer into a single vCenter or multiple virtual centers, and it'll actually help you to proactively determine whether you have a problem. And you can look at it from the entire world level, custom groups, which over here is based upon groups that we have created, data centers. We only have a single cluster, so you can look at it from there. The hosts, you can click on, let's say, this host right here, and it'll show you all the VMs that you have running down here, kind of highlight them. You can say, you know what, I don't want to look at VMs that are powered off, so we can just get rid of those from the picture. And it'll reload it without all the VMs that are powered off. So you see they're gone. Now we just have the ones that are powered on this host right here. I can see my data stores that are connected to this host, and there's a potential problem. Ooh, got a problem right here. It's red. So we can double click on that guy, and it will pull it up, and I can actually analyze what's wrong with this red data store. Now, we have a lot of static data on some of these data stores. The problem most likely is going to be it's out of space, or it's approaching to being out of space. And most likely that's the problem with that guy. But we'll see here in a second. It gives you a nice graphical representation of what's going on. And there we go, disk space. So it's almost out of disk space, which I don't really care. The disk I/O, it's at 24%, so that's okay. And then it shows disk I/O is green. It's at the bottom end. But disk space, which in my environment, I'm not worried about disk space. So a lot of cool tools that you have for analyzing your environment. Again, I could go off for days or weeks or things like that, but in my mind, it truly is the best hypervisor that's available at this time. It's a little bit after 3 o'clock Eastern time, so we've been on a little bit over an hour. I'd like to, if you have any questions, please direct them through chat, and I want to appreciate everyone for coming to this webinar, and thank you.
Excellent, Sean. Thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody hanging on and enjoying what was shared there. I did put in the chat there that you can download RV tools at robware.net, and you can thank Rob. He's a fellow that's been in the industry for quite a while and building nice little free products like that, and you will find hundreds of good independent free tools that you can make use of in the virtualized, with the vSphere environment anyways. Now, before you guys take off, I wanted to let you guys know about a couple of things. And one of them is an iPad mini giveaway that we will be announcing fairly shortly here. We are working on a revamp of our forum. And on the forum, we're going to be announcing a giveaway that will be for anybody utilizing the VMTraining forum. And you can access that through vmtraining.net/forum. And we'll be looking at those that have the most posts. And every month, we'll be giving away an iPad mini for those that are doing the most posts on our forum, and that's really have to do with the relaunch of our entire forum and our blog site as well. Go ahead and keep track of that as well. We've been updating that, and we'll continue to update that. I did put a post on there with the latest release of RV tools, and we'll continue to provide that information as well. If you have any questions that you think of after you've walked away or something comes up or maybe you run into a product that, I'm not really sure how this fits in, feel free to ask us. Go to the forum. Sean monitors the forum, myself and most of our trainers monitor that forum, and we will respond to the best of our ability and help you out. And I'm telling you, if we don't know the answer, it's going to be pretty tough to find some. I could go through stories of individuals that thought they knew an awful lot about some of these different products, and we found out that they didn't know as much as we did, and I was rather disappointed. So we should be able to help you out with that. Now, the next webinar coming up, as I made mention, will be done by Mitch Garvis, who is a Microsoft guru. He is a Hyper-V evangelist. And he will be taking a lot of what Sean shared today and putting a Hyper-V spin on it to show where Hyper-V excels within the virtualization realm. And I'm really looking forward to that, and I'd like you guys to join us for that. We will be announcing that date coming up later on. Now, Sean, I do see a question that just popped up here. If you compare a paid product like vCops, why not compare it to System Center Operations Manager? Now, that's a very good question. Sean, do you have much experience with System Center Operations Manager and how that works or compares with vCops?
No. I do. I do have a lot of experience with that. The comparison here, like Operations Manager and things like that, I just threw these out there at the end to just say these are available. I didn't want to compare and say you should choose Hyper-V or VMware because of Operation Manager. Definitely not. I just said this is here. I think System Center Operation Manager is a good product. I don't think it's as easy to use, but that's a subjective comment right there. Whenever I say something's easy, the next guy's going to come along and go, what are you talking about? I think it's easy as heck to use. So, take that with what you will. Take that with a grain of salt. But I just didn't get into Mitch in his presentation. Will definitely be bringing up VCOps and or SCOM and SCVMM and going into those and why how those make it better. So I did not get into those. Yeah, that's correct. And Mitch will be covering some of that. Now, Robert Noble was kind enough to let me know here that vCops is not a paid product any longer. It's actually available with the standard edition of vSphere. The standard edition of vSphere comes with vCops Foundation Edition. So that's news to me. I was not aware of that, Robert. So thank you for letting us know, and I'll go take a look at that. And as I made mention, Mitch will get into all of that stuff, and he'll have a focus, a primary focus on Hyper-V in the next one. And then after that, Mitch and Sean will be going head-to-head. And then you'll see a lot of the real standout differences between those two products, where Mitch will be bringing out the best of his best, and Sean will be bringing out the best of the best with regards to vSphere. But the problem is Sean's not as much of a vSphere evangelist as Mitch is a Hyper-V evangelist. So that could be really interesting. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Very much appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions that you think of later, put them on the forum. We'll make sure they get answered. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sean. Thanks, guys.